So far, I have given 3 lectures that give a fairly good basis for understanding what fascism was about. You had the imperialism, the capitalism, the exploitation. You had the rise to power, the political terror, the lies, the propaganda. Now, there are many explanations for fascism in general, as well as for Hitler's rise to power, that are around. And of course, in the end, the goal I have is to explain it. That is what historians do. We don't throw up our arms and our hands or whatever we do throw up and say, gee, we don't know either. You know, could be this, could be that. No, we are, if we're doing our job, we're trying to come to some kind of sensible explanation why it had to be this way and didn't go another way, and what that means and what that tells us. So there are justifications of fascism by fascists and post and neo-fascists. There is denial, there are explanations, and there are analyses. Most of what you hear about fascism is at the level of explanation, not at the level of analysis. Oftentimes, this too is legitimatory, just as neo-fascists try to explain how it really wasn't what you thought, and it meant something totally different. Like when Dinesh D'Souza says Hitler was a leftist, he was a socialist. The liberals today, the most radical LGBT, Muslim-loving, anti-American, Obama-voting liberals, that is the true heirs of the Nazis, because guess what? They're intolerant towards people like me, Christian. That is a legitimization of fascism. It is at the same time saying, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. That wasn't us, but also really, we didn't think it was so bad. There is no shame in that. There is, on the other hand, people who have looked cursorily at fascism, liberals, mainstream, ordinary, decent conservatives who know a few things about fascism. And the danger is always, if you know a few things, especially if you are highly educated or formally highly educated, and you've often been told across your career that you are brilliant, you will more often than not be satisfied with a smart-sounding, partial, and ultimately false explanation of what you're looking at. In addition to that, fascism is such a useful tool throughout the Cold War. Both sides used it to justify their respective bloc in the Cold War. The Western alliance based on shared values of enlightenment, democracy, freedom, and an open society, pluralism, apple pie, puppies, and all that kind of stuff was, of course, always justified with reference to fascism. So was Soviet communism. And both, in part, were right, which is, of course, with any good ideology, how it has to work to be at all sold to anybody and believed by the people who promoted the most loudly. But in the fingers, in the blood-soaked fingers of Western imperialists, liberal and conservative, fascism becomes a legitimization ideology where everything you can label, oh, this is just like Hitler, happens to also align neatly with whatever geopolitical tools, goals, the West, the free world currently pursues. So you happen to have a long-term strategic conflict with China, possibly a conflict over resources, power, and land. Why? Of course, the Chinese are governing pretty much like the fascists. You want to go to war with some Middle Eastern despot? Well, of course it is, because he is just like Hitler. Name your guy, I'll show you the articles by think tanks, whether neoconservative or liberal doesn't matter. Don't get me started on Ukraine, seriously. That could be a whole nother seminar. In fact, it would probably be worth it. Now, what do we want to get at? We want to look at things that really define fascism, so that we don't, first of all, everybody's like, well, you can't compare things to fascism if you want to be taken seriously. That is only true up to the point where you get to compare somebody to Hitler, who happens to be in the crosshairs of American military and geopolitical ambition. But that aside, of course, you don't want to randomly compare everything and anybody to fascism. There is a certain unique evil to fascism, the deliberate, systematic erasure, murder, industrial-style annihilation of a whole people based on their ascribed race and practice or former religion. You do not commit that kind of mass murder on a scale of 6 million people by deliberate extermination alone, and then just casually compare that to other things. So for that reason, you do want to be specific. There are other ways in which people on the far left are using the term of fascism casually to apply to any kind of governmental repression done in the service of maintaining a hierarchical order that is patriarchal, capitalist, or racist. So that is another thing where we might look at fascism and try to draw the line. In what way is a police beating and murder in this country, as it occurs on a far too regular basis, a sign that the United States is fascist, or that Hitler just did normal stuff except to white people, and that's why it's a scandal? So these are all the different angles that people take on fascism that I want to go to. But before we do that, I have prepared for you a list of people I want gone by the end of that's the other. I have prepared for you a list of explanations for fascism. So, have you heard any of these things said by way of an explanation of why Hitler rose to power? Yeah.
I have, yeah. I would say that the second one is right off the bat was
Germany treating unfairly, but
yeah.
okay. Anyone else?
Extremists from the left and the right.
That one?
Yeah, I guess the same one will be the second one, and the extremism from the left and the right, yeah.
Germany was treated unfairly.
Yeah.
There was extremism from the left and right. What else? German culture was always headed this way. Yeah.
Just from my understanding, I would say the last one.
Germany was not like other countries. Yeah.
The Weimar Republic was too permissive.
Too permissive. You're thinking of like Isherwood and Cabaret and so forth. It's like transgender people in drag all over the place all the time. Yeah.
The first one.
Seduction, a demagogue who's leading people astray. Is there any of these that nobody has ever heard said? Which one?
The woman
Yeah.
easily built for Hitler.
That has fallen out of use quite a bit. There are other dumb explanations to do with gender. I'll get to that in a minute. So which one of these do you prefer? Which one that sounds the most correct? Would you dismiss any out of hand? Yeah.
The second one's fairly accurate, probably.
What else?
Well, for the ones I think are accurate is John Fairley of World War I, the extremists from the left and the right, and a bit of the mass psychosis. The one I kind of dismiss is easily wooed by Hitler and stupid people voting for Hitler.
Okay.
Germany is not like other countries, seems to be a lot of people at the top seem to feel that there's a German I don't want to say exceptionalism, if you will.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, Sonderweg basically is exceptionalism. That's the German version.
Just after that, I would say nationalism for the last one.
But let's make sure that we distinguish here between what people in Germany, especially fascists, thought about themselves and what we use to explain as historians why they came to power. Because we're not bound. I mean, yeah, if your approach to writing and studying history is the concept of memory, then of course you are giving away any critical tool to make a distinction between what happened and what people thought happened and believed happened. So at that point, the discussion is over and you have no critical tools. All you can do is copy down what the historical actor said. Why you can't do that, why that isn't good history, I told you when I talked about the book of oral history of local people in North Bremen, which was full of self-serving accounts of former Nazis, who now told some young, naive researcher who also believed in taking the voices seriously, that they were always against it. They never did a reality check. When I gave the book to my uncle, he flipped through it and was like, yeah, this is all lies. None of the historians ever bothered to fact check. So if you study memory, if you look at the historical accounts uncritically, you're doing fiction. You're doing the autobiography uncritically. In other words, we really need to make that distinction. What did these people say they wanted? Why did they say they did it? And what really happened? Because those are two different stories. And call me old-fashioned, but if you say, well, objectivity, you get laughed out of any graduate seminar in history. When you say we want to know what really happened, most people shut down and walk out. They don't want to know what really happened. They deny that it is possible to know what really happened. Well, the experience of German fascism, if nothing else, tells me that yes, you absolutely do want to know what really happened. And you can tell. Like if I punch you in the face and say this didn't happen, and it's my account that is as good as yours, obviously that is not good enough. History is the history of people punching others in the face and claiming it didn't happen. And historians who are in the business of writing that down are not doing that job. So for that reason, if people talk about keeping alive the memory of the victims and of the people who resisted, then simply writing down stories is not going to cut it. You need analytical tools. None of these are analytical tools. The bulk of them are, in fact, mildly transformed justifications served up by the Nazis themselves. The two most salient ones that were quoted here, why Germany had been treated unfairly and they were extremists from the left and right, are straight up Nazi talking points from 1932. Why do you need to take power? Because we need to restore German order and glory in the world. And why are you needed to take power for that? Because the commies are out there threatening order and stability and keeping us from reclaiming a proper place in the world. So two Nazi talking points still serve mainstream liberals as their main pseudo-analytical tools to explain what happened. If you're saying extremism from the left and right, you are literally subscribing to Hitler's narrative, who is saying, we are out there, we're innocent. We just went there to take a walk and look at the scenery. And then suddenly out of nowhere, the communists attacked us. We didn't go into their neighborhood with clubs and guns and provoke them. The communists said that? Well, they're communists. You know, you can't believe what they're saying. So let's go over this list of things that don't provide an explanation. First, the seduction of people by a demagogue. What kind of view of politics does this really offer up? It paints people as a kind of passive mass in the fingers of somebody who, by virtue of some qualities that are intangible, will influence them and lead them along. What way of thinking is that rooted in? It is an anti-democratic and going back all the way to Roman history, anti-republican, anti-self-government idea. Yes, you have a question?
Kind of downplays people's ability to think for themselves, right?
Well, yes, it does. And especially this is a very lopsided description of agency. The further down in the hierarchy you get, the less people are presumed to have it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say that it really makes it seem that everyone in Nazi Germany was just under some psychosis and they were seducted and they didn't choose to do it, they were more tricked to doing it.
Psychology always has the danger of exculpating, of saying, well, really, you were not in your right mind when you did it. Sure. But also, psychology it is in the nature of psychology to be about individual minds. You have a mind that functions according to whatever the standard or range of normal functions is. And then you have a mind that is not functioning right, that is hooked on fixed ideas or has a seeing things or whatever. Like the Jew is everywhere. Question?
Yeah, do you think this idea was persistent because people couldn't understand how such evil atrocities could have been carried out by normal people?
There is an element of that, of shock, but also, I mean, there's comfort in being able to explain something without actually having to go too much to the roots. And that is common to all these false explanations. So one more thought, hold your own thought. Fascism is a worldview. It is shared in identical form by millions of people. It is learned, it is taught. People bounce it off each other to see the world through the lens of it. It serves as an explanation for how the world functions. It serves as a template for how the world should be ordered. It is, in other words, not a matter of an individual mind that somehow goes wrong. It is a way of thinking that is shared and consciously developed, not on some animal brain level, between millions of people in a modern society based on a far advanced standard of technology, civilization, and science. So no, psychology is not going to tell you what is going on there. The analysis of ideology might, the question of how this functions. Of course, we want to ask, how do the ideas get into the heads of the people? But to look in the individual head for the answer is evidently misguided, because we're not looking at the individual alone, we're looking at the individual in the context of millions of people who share the same exact view. Okay, so
it also seems like it just puts all the liability or the responsibility just onto one person, and that nobody else is associated with anything that happened. They are all just under the same trance.
That's the other thing. Yeah, they're on the Trump train. They're just like, and this is of course where these false explanations are still salient. The guy who said in 2017 he was like a member of the national security establishment, some general who threw in the towel and in his farewell address basically said Trump is a stupid guy's idea of a smart guy. Democrats like to argue that Republicans are in the thrall of Trump, that they are voting this way or that in the Senate because they are afraid of Trump and his supporters. So in other words, the personal focus on the leader, who has often been called a demagogue, that is one of the most, among people who characterize Trump as a fascist, demagogue is usually something that comes up. So this is still something that people go to. And of course, part of the importance of all this is that so much of this is also the template, all these false explanations, through which liberal democracy today perceives the rise of global fascism. Second, Germany had been treated unfairly after World War I. The question of war guilt has been exhaustively debated. The scholarship is pretty much in unison that yes, Germany was at fault. There are, like Fritz Fischer in the 1950s, was crucified by that. But he wrote the book as a German historian, where he's saying, yes, of course, it was our fault. We had the opportunity to do it differently. Did that justify the high reparations payments on a tight schedule that caused economic decline in Germany, in hyperinflation, like runaway inflation, unemployment, the slashing down of the state apparatus, bureaucracy, services, and so forth at levels not seen again until the 1980s under Reagan and Thatcher. That kind of stuff evidently was a matter of hardship. What caused it? Was it reparations? Was it that the vindictive Western powers imposed these harsh measures on us? Was it because they took our colonies away or markets? Why wasn't that the point? Did you not fight that war because you wanted to increase your market share, the colonial empire, and so forth? And is that not how it works? That if you go to war and you lose, you do not get your demands fulfilled, but you actually might have to give some things up because the other side also has demands. So the way that the Nazis used what may at the heart of it be a legitimate issue affecting the livelihood of Germans, of many Germans, is nevertheless a matter of a nationalist framing. It is us being humiliated and exploited by the international order. This argument is never neutral to the rising notion of anti-Semitism. It is rarely possible for a nationalist German to think that without also thinking, and who's really to blame, if not the Jew, who financed the war on all sides and profiteered on all sides. And then, of course, half of anti-Semitic literature these days is filled with accounts of people who are attempting to prove that the Jews were running the financial system and that is why we got into World War I. Had nothing to do with imperialism and competition between imperialist powers looking for market share and resources. Oh no, that is not on the radar. We were all great white Western civilizations. We went to war against each other. What happened? But who could possibly have done this? It wasn't us. The people who pulled the triggers and sent the armies into the field and justified it. Must have been somebody else. So, but those who conceded that yes, like Otto Wels said in his last speech, dear Mr. Reich Chancellor, you have a point. The nation is humiliated and its honor must be restored. But may I remind you, I already said that 5 years ago, and we Social Democrats have been able to do it better. So the idea that these goals that the other side is listing as to why they need to take certain measures, that these goals are legitimate in and of themselves, is an unnecessary concession. Third, the idea that the Weimar Republic was too democratic and too permissive. You've all heard about the decadence of Berlin. Josephine Baker dancing in a skirt made out of bananas, and gay and lesbian people on the streets, out in the open, showing public displays of affection, all that kind of thing. Didn't we just push these normal Germans too far? The companion piece is to say too much freedom. People could say whatever they wanted. People could just, like the old elites that would filter and refine public discourse, lost, and they were replaced with people who simply did not have the practice. These social democrats, they were all about bread and butter. But could they really lead the people in a way that is also morally responsible and civilizational? Probably not. The idea that too many voices were being heard. There was no cutoff in the Weimar voting system for representation other than the arithmetic minimum. So with a 0.2% of the vote, Gesundheit, you might be able to get a seat in the Reichstag, 1 out of 670. It's a proportional representation, unfiltered. You get 1% of the vote, you get 6.7% of the seats. So you get 0.1% of the vote, you may just eke past the threshold needed to get a single seat. Oh, the splintering of the political system. Oh, the loss of stability. No wonder it all went to hell. So too much democracy. In the same vein today, you hear people argue that maybe if Democrats didn't push so strongly for the rights of those people, maybe then they would not have lost the culturally conservative working class voters who are up in arms about bathrooms, abortion, guns, and so forth. Who then also hear things like Obama saying, these are folks who are afraid to lose their, afraid about God, gays, and guns, or something like that, who are deplorable. In other words, they're a little bit uncivilized, but it's a fact of life that they vote in this country, so maybe we shouldn't be pushing them too far. In another narrative that also runs along the same trajectory, you heard people say after Trump's election, maybe we need more reliance on experts. That freewheeling opinionation on the internet is the problem. Anybody can just be out there and make a claim. We used to have gatekeepers. We used to have people who refined what got presented to the public, journalists, academics, teachers, and so forth. We need to restore that. We need to combat disinformation and put more filters in between the public and this kind of freewheeling debate. Communists refused to support democracy. Well, in many cases, when push came to shove, the last group of people with any kind of access to weapons and mass mobilization were often the communists. And guess who rose and defended democracy in those situations? If you said the communists, congratulations, you may sit back down. So in the case of Germany, why did the communists call the social democrats social fascists? Why did they categorically refuse to work with them? For pretty good reasons, because the social democrats were run by people who had shot at communists on multiple occasions in 1918, in 1923, in 1929. The police in many of these democratic lands, states of Germany, led by Prussian social democrats, had a long history of, at the behest of the social democratic leadership, using violent state repression against the communists and their followers. So you can hardly blame the victim here by saying they didn't come out strong enough to put everything on the line for the people who had been trying to murder them. But of course, to say the left with its unreasonable demands is to blame. That it alienates voters and so forth, that it didn't get with the program and therefore caused the rise of fascism is a perennial winner in liberal public discourse. Ask any Democrat why Trump won in 2016, and chances are you'll hear one out of these three. That it was Bernie Sanders' fault, that the Russians did it by manipulation, and that you need to vote blue no matter who, as long as the Democrat you vote for is sufficiently right-wing. Like, not if a left-winger wins a primary, then you run the old guy with Republican support, like they did with the mayoral race in Buffalo. Extremists from the left and right. I already explained why this is bollocks. It is the Nazi legitimization for their own violence. If you follow the guy who is prominent on Twitter, Andy Wu, NGO, who has been known to provide kill lists to people on the far right, of people he doesn't like, and he's now doing this kind of in an official fashion. He's writing back and forth, responding to having a dialogue with Elon Musk on Twitter, where he provides Musk with names of what he describes as violent left-wing individuals and their Twitter accounts. So he's already the deputized police troops in waiting, looking to go to town on their political opponents. All in the name of free speech, because what keeps us from exercising our freedoms? Well, of course, the violent left that threatens you and your families. And what do we need? Good patriotic Americans who can identify them and remove them from where they can do any harm. So out of the public sphere, and as long as we can put them behind bars, at least we can get them off the leg. So the function of this, to paint a group of people as a danger, to ascribe to them violence, is of course not just something that the fascists do, but it is something that the liberals lap up and just love. So you have a spate of menacing appearances of Proud Boys and other armed thugs at drag queen story hours across the country to intimidate people into ditching this beautiful custom of bringing out a drag queen to read to kids in a public library. And the liberal press, the New York Times, runs an article on that. And they're desperately looking for a both-sider story. So they find the John Brown Gun Club or Rifle Club that had to come out and defend one of those events on one occasion, saying, and it also leads to violence from the left, or threats of violence from the left and from the right. So this is ubiquitous, and it gives the person who says it the kind of, mantle of neutrality. You want to be against both sides who do it, right? So one of my favorite examples for that would be Dr. Holyoke in the political science department. When at one point I publicly challenged Joseph Castro and warned against the threat of fascism, pointing to various international examples. And this was in early 2018. Dr. Holyoke was there, and to his credit, he did not have me removed from the room, although Joe Castro probably would have loved to do that, but rather, called on me repeatedly. But on the substance of the matter, his response was to say, it is a matter of both sides. There are bad people on both sides. There is violence on both sides. And if you take classes in the Department of Political Science, from what I have heard, they pretty much teach the concept of extremism as a fact. They assume that this is a valid fact. So if this has changed recently, I am not aware of it. It is consistent with their public approach to defend American democracy by pretending it isn't in danger and cooperating with the Fresno Bee to run, I think it was a 5 or 6 part series of half-page dossiers on how does American democracy work. It's like they must think they're dealing with complete dumbasses. It's a primary school, possibly middle school level introduction to American government. No concept whatsoever that democracy rests on any social foundation that has to do with economic power. No acknowledgement whatsoever that there are ideas out there that are pro or anti-democracy, and that you might need to understand in the historical context. In other words, it is the applied theory of extremism. And this does not just by default benefit the right. It does not just by default amount to a justification of fascist violence. In praxis, too, it means that some of these individuals, ask them about it, may well have spoken to and given interviews to GB Wire, which is the local propaganda mill run by the Assimi family to support their ventures, and that has regularly hosted on their Facebook channel discussions that involve Proud Boy leaders, Republican members of the county board of supervisors and city council, members of the Assimi family, and some of their journalists. They have used this platform to give fascists justifications for why they should attack certain school board members, like Weber Islas, or members of the city council, like city council president Miguel Arias. So it's not just a tentative complicity. It is also a willingness to be blind on your right eye and to work with people who are actively undermining democracy. Next, stupid and evil people, especially workers, voted for Hitler. This is, of course, betrays the middle class resentment towards people who are not of their same status. It serves to exculpate the middle class and the educated people who were the bulk of early and sustained and enthusiastic Nazi support. Who do you think had the time and resources to be out there with good weapons, with new access, with cars to go and travel to these communist neighborhoods and beat people up, or throw stones into the windows of Jewish stores, but people with the middle class and upper middle class backbone? So if you're looking for groups of people who were backing the Nazis and were organized early on, you have fraternity students, you have clubs of officers from the war, you have professional organizations, you have everything that is in some fashion middle class, highly educated, and well-to-do. Much in the same way as January 6th, attackers traveled to Washington, D.C. more often than not with their private planes rather than by stagecoach. But it is such a comforting thought that what you're dealing with when you're dealing with fascism is people who simply don't get it, who lack a certain something morally or intellectually to understand the value of the liberal position. After the 2016 election, a liberal, progressive feminist on Twitter piped up to say that if you say working class, your racism is showing. That kind of summarizes liberalism quite nicely. You see what you see when somebody says working class is a white man, in which that happens to also match not completely with the fascist description. Who is the real America? You immediately have the picture of a guy with a pickup truck and a baseball cap and his wife and 2.5 children. So there is no distinction between the middle class view, the people, the educated middle class, who are formulating these political ideologies and keeping them in circulation. They all have disdain for the working class. They pick and choose certain individuals to celebrate, of course, to parade around as totems of their commitment to the common people, whether it's to uplift the voices of immigrant women or, to celebrate the achievements of a self-starter businessman who came to this country from some shithole. So in both ways, you have someone who you can hold up, who you can bring in, who you can uplift. But that doesn't mean that you consider people at the lower rungs of society as worthwhile before they've been uplifted. They're not shunted to the side or this way or that. They're uplifted. Where you is up. And where they were is down. What distinguishes liberals from conservatives is our capacity for empathy. This was the gist of many articles in the New York Times in 2016 and 2017. And you could nod along in agreement and say, yes, these people are terrible, aren't they? How good are we, by contrast? Whenever something happens, like two school teachers in Salinas were kicked out of their jobs, they were in high school, they were hosting the LGBTQ club, a safe space for people who were coming out, who may not have had the support of their parents, who were bullied, harassed in the community, in school. They did this with discretion, competence, professionalism, to the point where the Teachers Association invited them to give a talk at a panel where people were talking about how do you deal with them? You have LGBTQ students, you're in a conservative community, what do you do to support them? So they presented their project, they joked around, yes, and that is when we turn them and bring them over to the dark side. Little did they know that filming the whole proceedings was a fascist operative, a woman who was working, I think, with Project Veritas. The thing went up on the internet, and within days, they were out of a job, had to move, were subjected to death threats, the whole 9 yards. I mean, that's the point. The point of these targeted harassment, terror campaigns, of the death threat machine, of the death threat mechanism on the right, is to raise the bar for speaking out and doing things. And it works, because not only was it evident from what these two poor teachers said, that they had no idea what happened to them. They couldn't explain it. They were stuck in the liberal incomprehension all the way. What is this fascism that's coming from you? We were just trying to help some teens. Who could possibly object to them? In the press, liberal experts, professionals in the field were cited, saying, but the data show that LGBTQ teens and kids do better if they have these kinds of programs. So we don't know why anybody would not support them. In other words, so blinded by their professionalism are these people that they do not recognize the political campaign and its motivations when they see it, and all they can say is, well, they must be really dumb or evil that they don't want to support LGBTQ folks, or that they don't understand the data, or they haven't gotten around to studying the method. So it is this kind of arrogance, this kind of aloof detachment that is self-defeating. And don't get me started on the idea that, oh, look, Republicans are saying one thing and doing another. That is not analytical, that is just to make yourself feel superior. The next, women who were wooed and fell for Hitler, his beautiful blue eyes and strong thighs and all whatever, you don't hear that much anymore. What you do instead, however, here are odd ways in which feminist tropes and fascist self-image play off each other. So Lauren Boebert posing with her guns, and the celebration from Republicans that now you see you have strong, empowered women who are conservatives. There is no challenge to that. There is no sense of alarm that you need to address this among feminists. I specifically asked at a panel for Women's History Month hosted here by the Women's Studies Department. I submitted a written question saying, how do you deal with this appropriation of by fascists, a feminist language of empowerment? And the closest thing I got to an answer was Dr. Kanzinger saying, well, what do you expect? Of course, women are also going to be better fascists. So there is no idea that there is a specific gender ideology that goes with this spectrum, and that it is not the same as being able to say, oh, it's just patriarchy as usual. It isn't. And we'll talk about that. We'll have to talk about that in much more detail. German culture was headed that way. Fichte, Wagner, Nietzsche, etc. Set Germany up to be coldly predatory, while at the same time thinking we were doing good. We were removing an evil standing in the way of reforming the world. When it comes to American liberalism and their wrong ideas, the 1619 Project thesis that racism preceded slavery, that racism is an ancient evil, an idea that prefigures, that predates institutions and practices, that it is inherent in the founding of the United States, is one of those parallel notions. Not to say that racism doesn't exist. But most people, when you reject the premises of the 1619 Project, most of its adherents will then turn around and say, oh, you must be a racist if you don't agree with us. That is, of course, nonsensical. My critique would be that if you want to overcome racism, maybe, same with fascism, start with a sensible analysis of what you're actually dealing with. This ain't it. And the approach to ethnic study, that if only you explain it slowly and loudly enough to people that it is wrong to be mean to women and Black people, then they will understand it. And even if they can't help it, they might just not act on the impulse. So the attempt to change culture and minds, likewise, is stuck with symptoms. Germany was not like other countries. Which country is like other countries? Which country is the norm? We'll return to that question too. But of course, there are many explanations both for what this political moment is about with the rise of fascism, as well as to why it's not dangerous, that use this figure of thought. This is America. And then do with whatever you want. But my absolute favorite, number 10 on the list, or number 1 if we're counting down, is civility. And I might want to return to that later. But just for now, let me say, I want to play the song. And then I think I'll return on Friday to why. When I see people preaching civility, I just want to curse them out. Here is Kurt Tucholsky. Let roses line their path.
Ihr müsst sie lieb und nett behandeln, erschreckt sie nicht, sie sind so zart. Ihr müsst mit Palmen sie umwandeln, getreulich ihrer Eigenart. Pfeift eurem Hunde, wenn sie ankläfft, küsst die Faschisten, wo ihr sie trefft.
Return to this, but I just want to give you my translation. The poem, song written in 1931. Treat them kind and gentle here. Do not fluster them, poor dears. Fan them with palm fronds from afar. They cannot help the way they are. So scold your dog quite harshly if he barks. Do kiss the fascists wherever they are. And this is, of course, a take on the communist slogan, beat the fascists wherever they are. If they incite to hatred in their meetings, say, yes, sir, thank you, best of greetings. Take me away and tear me apart. And if they beat you, praise the Lord. You see, that temper is a little short. Do kiss the fascists wherever they are. And if they shoot you, oh, dear God, do you so stubborn cling to life? What a wimpy course you plot. Be a glad victim in this strife. Call them little twinkle toes, give them Skittles and Oreos. And even if you feel stuck deeply in your guts, Trump's dagger to its hilt as far, do kiss the fascists wherever they are. I translated this in January 23rd, 2017, under the impression of Trump's rise to power and the women's march. Why the women's marches? I can tell you on Friday. Suffice it to say that the slogan, love Trump's hate, struck me as so dumb as to give love a bad name for many, many years to come, and speaks to exactly the mindset that Tucholsky is so ably satirizing in 1931. Liberals who believe that civility, being nice to people, being nice to fascists, is really what this is all about. That's it for today. Thank you.